Yes, as you can see by this slide, we have tried to communicate these three different elements. When we were thinking about change, we were thinking initially about leadership. So whenever you were in a transformation in a company, oftentimes you would hear, we're doing great as a team, but only if leadership or management would also act on this change, that would be great. So it's not as much us, it's more leadership. So when we're thinking about the topic of leadership, we think, what does leadership actually mean? And when you're thinking about leadership, it basically boils down to ownership. And that ownership, if you're trying to unwrap that, you will get to these three elements. So when does a person take ownership? When does a person take the lead into something? Well, obviously you need a driver and you do need that action component, because without action, nothing happens. But a deciding factor within that threefold approach is the amount of belief that a person actually has in that change, in the things that we need to do. And that is what creates that ownership. So our point in this presentation is to focus on that belief being a part of ownership. And we think that a large part of organizations fail in the transformations and their change, not due to the fact that they have a bad driver or a bad action plan in place, or they're not doing enough about it. But in essence, what it really boils down to is that they really have difficulty believing is needed, or whatever they are doing will not lead to an actual change. And this is an interesting dynamic when you start to unpack it, because when you start to notice this or think about this threefold approach towards ownership, then you maybe will recognize some of these statements that we've written down for you that would show you some of the belief, or rather unbelief, that's underlying. So maybe you've heard one of these statements in your line of work. I will believe it when I see it, obviously being one of the strongest contenders for the level of belief in ownership. Or if this fails, we'll try something new, right? So it doesn't really matter. So we'll just try this agile stuff. And if it doesn't work, sure, we'll pivot to blue ocean strategy, or I don't know, something else that you can think of that will probably bring about the next big change. Or let's talk again about this change after you got the teams working. So a one that leaders would many times utter towards you when you're trying to up the game and talk about leadership, about the change in the company. And maybe you can think of a belief statement that you've also heard in your work when trying to coach or consult on a organizational change. And the thing I want to talk about in this slide is also about the matter that we've put here, unbelief, between brackets, because all of these statements actually are belief statements. You can also have a very strong belief that something will not succeed, that something will fail. And as we will show you later on this presentation, that belief that something will not fail, that faith, that belief is so strong that it will actually fail, because you will start only see evidence of that failing in practice for yourself. Your brain works in a way that it will help you to see the points of failure. So all of these statements are actually statements of belief. And that's an interesting dynamic to start to recognize when thinking about change. So when unpacking these belief statements,